I'm here today with Terry Glaspey. Terry is the author of a new book called Discovering God Through the Arts, How We Can Grow Closer to God by Appreciating Beauty and Creativity. Terry is also the author of over a dozen other books, including 75 Masterpieces Every Christian Should Know, Not a Tame Lion, The Spiritual Legacy of C.S. Lewis, and The Prayers of Jane Austen. He lectures for colleges, conferences, and churches in the United States and abroad, and teaches at Northwind Seminary. So Terry, it's wonderful to have you here today to talk about this new book.
It's my pleasure. I'm a big fan of the work that you do, so it's an honor to get a chance to chat with you.
Well, thank you. Same here.
Making room.
So before we get into the book, maybe you could start by kind of telling us more about your background, because you've done a number of different things that I think are pretty interesting in our whole publishing arena.
Yeah, well, in the world of publishing, I've had almost every different kind of job you could have, from working with selling books, editing books, acquiring books, helping to market books. I've been an author myself. And of course, above and beyond all that, I'm an avid reader. I'm a biblioholic, you know. An alcoholic can't walk by the liquor store without wanting to stop by in. I'm that way whenever I see a bookstore.
or an online bookstore in today's world, right?
Yeah, and today it's you know, a lot of my disposable income arrives at my front door in little boxes from various online book distributors. So yeah,
as is the case with us all these days, right?
Yeah. So, but you know, books have been important to me all my life, and as as I grew up, I lived in a family that really didn't put much emphasis on reading or the arts. And it was really at the time in which my faith became really real to me as a teenager that I was just hungry to learn more about it. And the best way was to read. A lot of the books I read then, I'd be embarrassed to admit to have read now. But it opened up a world to me. And writers like C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer, at one point in my journey, really opened up the idea that faith could be intelligent and creative. And that was really a turning point for me. And over the years, I feel like there was a lot of value in Francis Schaeffer, but I feel like I've kind of moved. That was like a stage I moved through. C.S. Lewis continues to be someone who nourishes me in my reading. And but both of them helped me to see that artistic expression was something really important. And I have just become a person who loves to read and watch great films and visit art museums and read books about the arts and visit beautiful architecture, go to concerts, listen to music of all kinds. And so as a consumer of the arts, I kind of have learned that the arts can have an important part to play in my spiritual journey. And in this book, that's kind of what I wanted to share with other people, is that journey.
So before we get to the new book, why don't you tell us a little bit about the previous books that you've authored?
Okay, yeah. A couple of the important ones probably along the way were the book on C.S. Lewis. That was kind of like paying a debt to Lewis for all he'd meant to me. That book was a finalist for a national award. And thoroughly enjoyed that book. I still feel good about that one, even though it's probably over 20 years old now. But it's still in print. And then another book I wrote, which has just been it's just been re-released now in paperback.
Yes.
Only a hardcover. That book was really an important book for me in that it gave me an outlet for you know, probably 35 or 40 years worth of really study of the lives of Christian creatives, great ones through the ages. And so the book kind of talks about I just picked not the 75 best works of art, literature, music, architecture, and film, but 75 that are kind of representative of the breadth of our heritage. And it was interesting. Out of that came the Jane Austen book, because while I was researching Jane Austen, I came across this little collection of prayers that she'd written for her family devotions. And I realized they weren't in print anywhere except as part of, big volumes of arcane writing from her that no one reads anymore. So I put those together into a book with a little introduction to it. And that's done well. My 75 masterpieces, I was so overwhelmed. Both Christianity Today picked it as Book of the Year in its category, and it also won an ECPA Gold Medallion Award.
Wow.
So academic audience and kind of a regular people's audience.
That's awesome.
Wonderful. So, and that's how I see myself. I want to be somebody who I see myself oftentimes as kind of a curator. I like to take big ideas and make them readable by the average person and understandable and actually enjoyable to read, hopefully, by the average person. So
cool. Well, how did the new book come about?
And the new book came about, it had been rattling around in my head. I got to thinking about how much of an impact art had made on my own personal life, and in particularly upon my own spiritual journey. And so, I sat down one day and started to list the various ways that the arts, the whole panoply of arts, how they had impacted me, and how in very practical ways they had actually become tools for spiritual formation. Just like prayer or meditation or service or worship with other believers, all those, we talk about those kinds of spiritual disciplines, ways that tools we can use to move forward. Well, it seems to me that the arts can operate in our lives in the same way. And I've found that I really couldn't find any books that had been written on this topic of how can I use the arts as tools to move forward in my spiritual journey and grow richer and stronger, both as a Christian, but also as a human being, And I thought,
now, which type of arts do you focus on in the book? Paintings?
Yeah, in the book.
Or is it like across the board?
The book, it's paintings, it's literature, poetry included, of course. Music, there's a lot about music. There are, all the visual arts, film. I spent quite a bit of time talking about film. So it's kind of a whole broad range of arts. And I'm somebody who loves to partake of all of those. And what I'm trying to suggest through the book is that if other people do that, not only will it bring a lot of joy and fascination and make you a more probably interesting person to talk to, hopefully, but it'll actually help you draw closer to God. It'll help you understand other people better and be more compassionate in your approach to life. So.
Wow. Well, Christianity obviously is very segmented into lots of different pockets. Right. And I would say Christians' interaction or view of art is very different.
It is.
From either segments of Christianity or segments of art.
Right.
In terms of, how closely different groups may relate or not relate to different types of music or different types of, painting. So how do you see that?
Yeah. This message goes down very easily if you're part of a church that's more sacramental or liturgical in your approach, because, Catholic Church, Anglican Church, Lutheran Church have always tended to be more image driven, whereas certain parts of Protestantism are all about words. Words are important. And therefore, they may have created great novelists, but they haven't created very many painters. And what I want to say is it all can be brought together and these all can be used. I mean, I think a lot of times the average person these days, they kind of use art thinking with, like a preacher would think, I have the 3Ds. They think about it as art as decoration, as distraction, or as a form of devotion. So it can be, art can be something just to make your home look prettier. And maybe you choose your art by figuring out what would look good with the drapes, what matches with the sofa, brings out the right colors, or what just you think's pretty. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. That's a valid use for art to beautify the world in which we are. But art hopefully can be more than something that matches our furniture or some kind of background oral wallpaper for us to listen to as we go about our day. It can be more than that. A lot of us use art for distraction. It's like we talk about art as a way to kill time, which seems like a really mean thing to do to poor old, but we do. We look for something to help take it. Life is hard. Life's complicated. We're oftentimes tired and worn out. And so we want art that will distract us. And so we pick art like movies and books that are exciting and, popular. And once again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I can enjoy a James Bond movie with the best of them, but I'm looking for more than distraction from art. And then the third way it's used, I think, as a tool of devotion. And maybe better word there is a sign of devotion. We use art in listen to worship music as a way to make our worship experience with God be more meaningful, or we find these very pragmatic uses. Once again, all that is fine. But what I'm suggesting is more than a sign of our devotion to God, more than something that marks us out as this is, a Christian, I think it's terrible to use it in an adjective, but we do a lot. Christian movies, Christian books, whatever, but it can be more than that. It can be more than just something to fill our time and help us just to kind of relax. It can be more than just something to beautify. It can literally be something to change our lives. That's a long answer to that question, but.
Well, I'd like to focus a little bit on music for a moment because, there's been these huge waves, it seems like to me, of periods of time where music was incredibly influential within Christianity. And I'll just name just three, and then I'd love to get your perspective on this. One was, the result of the Reformation, right? We have all these hymns, right?
Yeah.
That have stood the test of time that, at least in the churches I've always attended have, been standards, right?
Right.
And then there was another huge wave of symphonies and orchestra music that was in the time when composers were commissioned, right, to write this kind of stuff, just like Michelangelo was commissioned to, do paintings and things like that.
Absolutely.
And then another completely different wave is like contemporary worship, which is, completely different form of music, but music has been a pretty important component to that genre of worship.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you can even go back, beyond the Reformation and think about the importance of Gregorian chant.
Oh, sure. Of course.
There's been a connection between one way to approach this is to say there is always been this idea that the words of Scripture could be translated to us and shared with us through musical composition. And so, like great sacred music has taken all kinds of forms, everything from Gregorian chant to the sacred chorale to the African-American tradition, both of the spiritual and of gospel music, within country music and bluegrass. just any tradition you look at, it's been a good way, it's been a good delivery system for not just a message. I think that's the mistake we sometimes make as Christians, is we think art is supposed to be delivering a message. I think instead what it's really about is delivering an experience. It's making an experience possible. And that instead of answering questions that we have, that art really is about evoking the right kind of questions within us. Instead of answering, it's about evoking questions. And when it evokes those questions, I think that's when it moves us most powerfully. And the magic of say, Handel's Messiah is that as we listen to those very familiar words, suddenly those words are more than familiar words to us when they're delivered to us with this transcendent music.
Absolutely.
And I'm not a snob. I love all kinds of music. And I've been impressed. I've been listening to, there's a group out now they call themselves the Psalms Project, and they're actually writing contemporary worship music for each and every one of the 150 Psalms.
Wow.
They're trying to stay pretty close to the text. And not all the music is totally to my taste. Some of them might be a little more pop than I like, but it's powerful. And once again, it's a delivery system, just like great paintings of biblical stories and biblical events or theological ideas in museums. These great paintings, when we spend time with them and then we go back and read the scriptures, suddenly our reading of the scriptures just comes alive in a new way. So I recently did a class at my church Sunday school class where we went through, we spent like 2 Sundays just focused on going through paintings of the crucifixion of Jesus. And we looked at several dozen, and each one taught us something new about the crucifixion and helped expand my way of thinking about what Christ has done for me.
So you mentioned experiences. And so since you've been so heavily looking at this space, for many years, I imagine there's some particular experiences that you've had that have been meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, I could spend the rest of the day talking about it. And I'm not even going to give you necessarily my most important, but I'll give you what's kind of on the top of my head right now. There is a work by Henryk Górecki, and Górecki was a Polish composer who took and died not that many years ago. So he's a modern composer who took the text of a prayer of a prayer to Mary to help the people in need. He wedded that with the text that was found scrawled on the walls in a Nazi concentration camp. Someone writing kind of a prayer of hope and praying for help. And then he put it with absolutely transcendent music. And every time I hear it, it's a symphony that the first part of the 3 parts is instrumental, but then in the second part, it breaks out into a beautiful solo that is the words to those prayers. And that's the kind of thing that every time I hear it, it just moves me so deeply, as does several of Bob Dylan's albums. Just the other day, I was listening to Bob Dylan's album, Desire. And for some reason, that particular album, along with others by him, always just moves me deeply. Or a film like The Tree of Life by Terrence Malick. The first time I watched it, I thought, I don't even understand what he's trying to say. And by the second or third, but it was so beautiful, I had to watch it again. And each time I received something fresh and new from it about the way of grace versus the way of nature. It was kind of a meditation on the way of grace and how grace transforms everything in our lives. So those are just a few. I mean, I've had moments in, one of the things I write about in my book, I'll do this last one, is that I was in Venice because I was part of a tour that was going through major cities of Italy. And I happened to have a day completely to myself. And I knew that one of the things I wanted to see was something that wasn't in any of the guidebooks, but was a place where there were a whole bunch of paintings by one particular artist named Jacopo Tintoretto. And Tintoretto was commissioned to fill the rooms of this confraternity with paintings, biblical paintings, mostly paintings of the life of Christ. And I remember, when I went there, I paid my admission, got in, and hardly anybody was in there. I had a place almost to myself, and at the lower floor, and was just so moved. I went up into the second floor, looked around, and there was kind of a back corner, a room that they used to use as a meeting room for the confraternity. When I turned the corner and looked in, there was across the entire back wall this giant painting of the crucifixion. And I stood before it just in awe. I literally couldn't breathe for a minute. And I found myself praying. I didn't intend to start praying. I just found myself praying because I was moved so deeply. And throughout the day, as I was visiting other beautiful sites, that painting kept coming back to me. Beautiful things visual art does is it plants pictures in our heads that we can return to for nourishment again and again.
Goodness sakes. So in your book, do you talk at all about misuse of art, as more propaganda?
Well, I've tried very hard not to spend a lot of time banging the drum against artist propaganda. I do touch on it a little bit because I do think that becomes a temptation for Christians to use art as a tool to try to convince other people. And that's why I'd say art is not about delivering answers. Art is about evoking questions. And I mean, you think about it, preaching, the idea of preaching is to offer people a clear message. Here it is, 3 points or whatever. And clarity is important. In the arts, it's the opposite. Ambiguity is important because it gives us room to get inside of how that artist thought or felt or what they experienced, and it just enriches us and it gets us to thinking in fresh ways and seeing things maybe that we had never seen before. And so, I didn't want to write a book about defending why it's okay for Christians to engage with the arts, because that's already been done. I maybe give 4 pages of that in the entire book, and then I'm off to the races because I really want to talk from a positive angle about what it can do for you. Nor did I want to, write a book like Frankie Schaeffer's old book, Addicted to Mediocrity, which mediocrity is a good descriptor for a lot of art that's out there. But I wanted to focus on introducing people to some really good stuff, which is why at the very back of the book, there are what I hope are fun lists of novels and poems and pieces of music of all genres and films, all things, art museums that you can actually make it part of your itinerary, your agenda for your life to actually get a chance to visit some of these. And then I welcome people to share with me some of theirs because I'd be interested in finding new ones myself. I'm always finding new great art that I hadn't known was there.
Cool. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of thought-provoking aspects of all of that for people. So if you had one thing to wish that people would take away from your book, what would it be?
I want people to say, I need to make art more of a priority in my life. I need to make more room for art in my life. You know, I need to decide that maybe instead of, you know, turning on a TV show that I'm not even really that interested in, maybe I'll pick up a book of poetry, or I'll watch a really good film, or maybe I'll just sit and just listen, do nothing else but just listen to a symphony by Mozart, or an album by Johnny Cash. You know, just to immerse ourselves in the arts. And then kind of alongside that, one of my real passions is I want to be able to encourage people who are creative that what you're doing matters. It's transformative for people's lives. And so put your energy into it. It's worth it. It's a very good and important thing that you're doing.
Well, Terry, I really am glad you did this book. I mean, it's going to be a very useful resource, I think, for folks. And
I hope so.
You know, both short term and I think long term too. One of the things that I just heard recently is that backlist sales, you know, have been much better across the industry these days because of the pandemic. And I think, you know, this is a book that's got some legs. It should be around for a while for people to, you know, refer to and learn from.
And I would love to see like groups of creative people in a church who feel like, you know, this church just doesn't really get us, which is probably true, to say, okay, why don't we get together as a group, work through this book and talk about it and share our own experiences. I provided lots of questions and even some suggested artistic or creative things you might do to put these to practice in your life. So I'm hoping people will catch the vision to do that.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Terry, thanks for spending some time to go through this with us. And I'm very excited about your book. I hope it does really well. And, you know, best wishes for you going forward with it.
And to you, Brian, thanks again for the opportunity to come and chat with you about the book, and keep up all the good things that you are doing.
Well, thanks so much, Terry.